One day, after paying all his bills, Ben opened his banking app and saw something strange. There was still money left in the account. Not zero, not $2 pathetic, an actual leftover balance. Ben checked again, then checked one more time, because usually, by the time the bills were done hitting, his account looked like it had been robbed by some wildly talented raccoons. And that's exactly when a question popped up that sounds boring, but can get very expensive in real life. What should Ben do with the extra money? Pay off debt or invest it? Because this isn't like choosing between one more episode and going to bed early. This one decision can mean a difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime, sometimes more. The biggest problem is that most people make this choice emotionally, not based on math, not based on a plan, just based on what feels right. Some people feel better paying off every debt as fast as possible. Other people hear about compound interest one time and suddenly want to invest every spare dollar they can find. But Ben figured something out pretty quickly. Instinct is great when you're picking a ripe banana. When money's involved, it helps to actually do the math. The first thing Ben learned was this: paying off debt is a return too. If a debt has an interest rate of 22%, then paying it off early gives Ben a guaranteed return of that same 22%. No risk, no panic, no surprise moment where the market decides to fall apart for fun. Investing works differently. Historically, the stock market has returned around 10% per year over long stretches of time, but the words historically and over long stretches are doing a lot of work there, because the market doesn't promise anything. One year it goes up, and Ben feels like a financial genius. The next year it drops, and Ben just sits there staring at the app like it personally betrayed him. That's why the question of whether to pay off debt or invest can't be solved with a calculator alone. On paper, it looks simple. If the debt costs 5% and the market averages 10, then investing looks better. But real life has risk, it has stress, it has age, it has job stability, and it has that very real chance that Ben sees his portfolio drop and suddenly wants to sell everything at exactly the worst possible time. When Ben pays off debt, the result is guaranteed. Interest stops chewing through his money. Monthly pressure gets lighter. Life gets calmer. When Ben invests, the upside might be higher, but nothing is guaranteed. Now let's make this real. Say Ben has a mortgage of $350,000 at 4% for 30 years. The monthly payment is about $1,670, and Ben also has an extra $1,000 every month. He can put that extra money toward the mortgage, or he can invest it. If Ben throws that extra $1,000 at the mortgage, the loan gets paid off in about 14 and a half years instead of 30, and he saves roughly $140,000 in interest. That already sounds pretty good. Then, once the mortgage is gone, Ben can invest not just the extra $1,000, but the old mortgage payment too. That's about $2,670 a month for the remaining 15 and a half years. Using an average market return of around 10%, Ben ends up with roughly $1,200,000 in his investment account by the end of the 30-year period. If you factor in the interest he avoided, the total benefit comes out to around $1,100,000. That's a strong result. Now look at the second option. Ben simply pays the mortgage on schedule and invests the extra $1,000 every month from day one for the full 30 years. This is where time steps in. And time in investing is basically a second Ben, just more disciplined and a lot less distractible. Over 30 years, that strategy could grow to around $2,200,000. Yes, Ben would also pay about $250,000 in mortgage interest over that time. Not exactly fun. But even after that, his total net worth would still be around $1,900,000. The gap between the two strategies is roughly $800,000. Now it would be easy to get carried away here and say, okay, then always invest and never pay off debt early. But not so fast. A mortgage is a special kind of debt. It usually has one of the lowest interest rates regular people can get, and it's often fixed. That matters because inflation starts helping Ben. Today, $1,670 feels like a serious monthly payment, but 15 or 20 years from now, that same payment may feel a lot smaller. Prices will be higher. Ben's income might be higher too, but the mortgage payment stays the same. The bank gets paid back in dollars that are worth less, so fixed-rate debt gets easier over time. That's great for Ben. The bank, for once, can be the one feeling a little dramatic. Credit card debt is a completely different story. If Ben is carrying a balance at 18, 22, or even 29%, there's barely anything to debate. That debt needs to go first. No serious investor should count on beating a rate like that consistently and safely. Sure, there's always some guy who claims he has the perfect stock. Ben doesn't get too excited about that anymore. The perfect stock usually disappears as fast as bananas in the break room. That's why Ben uses the avalanche method for expensive debt. He pays off the highest interest rate first, no matter how big or small the balance is. It's not always the most emotionally satisfying method, but mathematically, it works better. The snowball method, where people knock out the smallest balances first, can feel more motivating, but the avalanche method usually leaves Ben with more money in his pocket. Then there's the middle category: student loans, car loans. Here, it depends a lot on the actual interest rate and the details. If the rate is low, investing might win. If it's higher, Ben needs to be more careful. Cars also come with their own problem. They start losing value almost immediately. So when Ben aggressively pays down a car loan, he's putting extra money into an asset that keeps shrinking in value. That doesn't mean paying off a car loan early is always wrong. It just means the answer isn't as obvious. Another important rule is to think about age and time horizon. If Ben is young, has steady income, and retirement is still far away, he can ride out market drops and give his money time to grow. If Ben is closer to retirement, a major market drop stops feeling like a temporary inconvenience. It starts looking like a real threat. And at that point, the guaranteed benefit of paying off debt starts to look a whole lot better. But age still isn't the biggest factor. A lot of this comes down to what's going on inside Ben's head. One version of Ben is perfectly fine carrying cheap debt and investing the difference. Another version sees a loan balance and feels like he's back in a cage again, except now it's financial. If debt keeps Ben up at night, that matters. You won't see it in a spreadsheet, but it's real. There's also one thing Ben sees as non-negotiable: an emergency fund. Cushion first, everything else second. At least enough to cover 3 to 6 months of expenses. Yes, it's boring. Yes, the money just sits there and barely does anything. But that boring money is what saves the whole strategy when life decides to test Ben. Lose a job, need a car repair, get hit with surprise expenses. And without that cushion, Ben either takes on new debt or sells investments at exactly the wrong time. There's one more important thing: free money. If Ben has a retirement plan at work with an employer match, he takes that first, every time. Because this is one of the rare moments in life when someone is literally adding money to the pile just because Ben made the right decision. And if the answer still isn't obvious, Ben doesn't turn it into a whole drama. He can split the extra money. Some goes toward debt, some goes into investments. No, that's not always the perfect mathematical answer, but it lowers the risk and makes it easier to stay consistent for years. And that matters more, because the worst case scenario isn't Ben picked the slightly less optimal strategy. The worst case scenario is doing nothing at all, thinking about it for a year, comparing options for another year, then waiting again for the perfect moment. And while all that is happening, time stops working for Ben. It starts working against him. So Ben's conclusion is simple: if the debt is expensive, he pays it off fast. If the debt is cheap and fixed, he doesn't panic and often leaves more room for investing. And if the answer is somewhere in the middle, he looks at the interest rate, his age, his income, his stress level, and how much room for error he has. Then he makes the call. Ben doesn't need the perfect answer. He needs a workable one, something he can stick with for years. No wobbling, no panic, no rebuilding the entire plan every time the market gets ugly or a new finance guru shows up online. Because in personal finance, the winner usually isn't the person who came up with the smartest strategy once. It's the person who picked a reasonable strategy and didn't quit halfway through.